Welcome to the Learn and Talk English podcast. I'm
Ah,
so glad you're here today because we're going to talk about something really important. Um, Sentence structure. You know how a house needs a strong foundation to stand tall and withstand storms?
yeah,
Well, sentences are the building blocks of our communication, right? And they need a solid structure too.
that's a great analogy. Yeah. Without a good understanding of sentence structure, our communication can crumble and our ideas can get lost.
Exactly. And that's why we're going to break down how to build sentences from the ground up. We'll start with the simplest elements and then gradually add more complexity so you can express yourself clearly and confidently.
And the best part is you don't need to be a grammar expert to master this.
Yeah.
With a little practice and the right guidance, anyone can learn to build strong and effective sentences.
Absolutely. So let's dive in and start with the most basic element of a sentence, the verb. Verbs are action words. They tell us what's happening.
Think of verbs like the engine of a car. They provide the power and movement. Without a verb, a sentence just sits there like a car with a dead battery.
I love that image. So can you give us some examples of verbs?
Sure. Some common verbs are run, jump, eat, sleep, think, speak, write, and learn.
Great examples. Now, here's a fascinating thing. Did you know that you can create a complete sentence with just a single verb?
That's right. We call these sentences imperatives, and they're basically commands.
Like stop or listen.
Exactly. These one-word sentences work because the subject, the person or thing doing the action, is implied.
So in the sentence stop, it's understood that the speaker is telling someone else to stop.
Precisely. And these simple commands can be very effective in certain situations.
Like if you see someone about to walk into traffic, you'd yell, stop.
Exactly. But most of the time, we want to build sentences that are a little more complex than just a single verb.
Right. We want to express more nuanced thoughts and ideas. So how do we move beyond those one-word wonders?
Well, the next step is to add a subject to our verb. The subject tells us who or what is performing the action.
So if our verb is run, we could add the subject he to create the sentence, he runs.
Exactly. Or we could add the subject they to make the sentence they run.
And this simple structure, subject plus verb, is the foundation for building all sorts of sentences.
It is. And once you have that core, you can start adding more details to create richer and more interesting sentences.
That sounds exciting. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's make sure our listeners really understand this basic subject-verb structure.
Good idea. So to recap, the subject is the who or what that is doing the action, and the verb is the action itself.
And together, they form the core of a sentence.
Exactly. Now, let's explore how we can expand on this basic structure. One way to add more detail is to use adverbs.
Adverbs. Remind us what those are again.
Adverbs are words that modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. They tell us how, when, where, or why something happens.
So they're like little helpers that provide more information about the action or description.
That's a great way to think about it. For example, if our basic sentence is, he runs, we could add the adverb quickly to create the sentence, he runs quickly.
Ah, so now we know not only that he runs, but also how he runs.
Precisely. And we could add other adverbs like early to tell us when he runs. He runs quickly early in the morning.
Or in the park to tell us where he runs. He runs quickly early in the morning in the park.
Exactly. And you can see how adding these adverbs creates a more vivid and detailed picture for the listener.
It's like adding brushstrokes to a painting. Each adverb adds a little more color and depth.
I love that analogy. And the more adverbs you use, the more precise and nuanced your sentence becomes.
But we don't want to overdo it, right? We don't want our sentences to sound clunky or awkward.
That's right. It's important to use adverbs strategically and to make sure they flow naturally within the sentence.
So how do we know which adverbs to use and where to place them?
Well, there are some general rules and guidelines, but the best way to learn is through practice and exposure to the language.
So reading and listening to English will help us develop an ear for how adverbs are used effectively.
Exactly. The more you immerse yourself in the language, the more you'll start to internalize these patterns.
Yeah, makes sense. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about another important element of sentence structure. Complements.
Complements are words or phrases that complete the meaning of a verb.
Okay, that sounds a little complex. Can you give us some examples?
Sure, think of verbs like, want, or go. These verbs need something else to make sense.
Right, you wouldn't just say she likes. You'd need to say she likes ice cream or she likes reading.
Exactly. Those objects, ice cream and reading, are complements because they complete the meaning of the verb like.
So it's like each verb has its own set of rules about what kind of complement it needs.
That's a great way to put it, and understanding those rules is key to building grammatically correct and meaningful sentences.
This raises an interesting question then. How do we know which complement a verb needs?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, there isn't a single definitive list. The best way to learn is, again, through practice and exposure to the language.
So we need to pay attention to how different verbs are used in different contexts.
Precisely. And as you read and listen to more English, you'll start to develop a sense of which complements sound natural with which verbs.
This all makes sense, but I have to admit, it can feel a bit overwhelming at times. There are so many different elements to consider when building a sentence.
I understand. It's like learning any new skill. It takes time and effort to master. But the more you practice, the easier it will become.
And the rewards are definitely worth it. Being able to express yourself clearly and effectively is a valuable skill in any area of life.
Absolutely. And that's why we're taking the time to break down these concepts step by step.
So you can build a strong foundation for your English communication.
Exactly. And speaking of building, let's add another layer to our sentence construction knowledge. Adjectives and adverbs.
Okay, these are words we use all the time, but I admit I sometimes mix them up. Can you remind us what each one does?
Absolutely. Adjectives describe nouns. They tell us more about the qualities or characteristics of a person, place, or thing.
So like a red car or a delicious meal.
Exactly. They add color and detail to our descriptions. Adverbs, on the other hand, modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. They provide more information about how, when, where, or why something happens.
So we could say he drives carefully to describe how he drives, or they arrived early to tell us when they arrived.
Precisely. And using adjectives and adverbs effectively can really elevate your writing and make it more engaging for your reader.
I can see how that would be true. Instead of just saying, the soup was good, you could say, the soup was incredibly flavorful and aromatic, which paints a much more vivid picture.
You got it. But it's important to remember that adding adjectives and adverbs won't fix an incomplete sentence.
Oh, that's a good point. So if your sentence is missing a necessary complement, piling on descriptive words won't magically make it grammatically correct.
Exactly. It's like trying to build a house without a foundation. No matter how fancy the decorations, it's not going to stand up.
Great analogy. So we've covered the basics of building simple sentences, and we've even started adding some flair with adjectives and adverbs. Now, are you ready to move on to something even more exciting?
I am. Let's talk about complex sentences.
Ooh, complex sentences. This sounds like we're moving into advanced territory, but don't worry, we'll break it down step by step so you can follow along easily.
A complex sentence is simply a sentence that contains more than one clause.
A clause being a group of words with a subject and a verb.
Precisely. And there are a couple of ways to create these complex sentences. One way is to connect two independent clauses.
Independent clauses being clauses that can stand alone as complete sentences.
You got it. And we connect these clauses using coordinating conjunctions.
Coordinating conjunctions being those handy words like and, but, so, or yet, for, and nor.
Exactly. So, for example, you could have the sentence, he runs around the park every morning, so he is in good shape.
So in that sentence, he runs around the park every morning is one independent clause, and he is in good shape is another independent clause. And they're joined by the conjunction so.
Spot on. Each part could stand alone as a sentence, but by combining them with a conjunction, you create a more complex and nuanced thought.
And it's not just so. We could use any of those coordinating conjunctions to link those two ideas together, depending on the relationship between them.
Exactly. And would indicate addition, but would show contrast or would present an alternative, and so on.
So by using these conjunctions, we can express a wider range of ideas and show how different parts of a sentence relate to each other.
You got it. And that's the beauty of complex sentences. They allow you to express more intricate relationships between ideas and create a more sophisticated flow in your writing.
It's like weaving a tapestry instead of just drawing a single line.
I love that analogy. It perfectly captures the essence of complex sentences. They add depth and texture to your language, making it more engaging and thought-provoking.
So we've explored one way to create complex sentences using two independent clauses and a coordinating conjunction. Are there any other ways to build these multi-clause sentences?
Absolutely. We can also create complex sentences using dependent clauses. Now, dependent clauses are a bit different, right?
Yes, they are. A dependent clause, unlike an independent clause, cannot stand alone as a complete sentence. It needs to be attached to an independent clause to make sense.
That's right. It's like a supporting actor that relies on the lead actor to shine.
And we introduce these dependent clauses using subordinating conjunctions.
Exactly. Subordinating conjunctions like because, although, if, unless, while, when, since, until, as if, and even though create a dependent relationship between the clauses, meaning one relies on the other for its meaning.
So, for example, we could say, because it was raining, I stayed inside. Because it was raining is the dependent clause, and it can't stand alone. It needs the independent clause, I stayed inside, to make a complete sentence.
Precisely. And you'll notice that the dependent clause often provides context or a condition for the main action in the independent clause.
It's like setting the stage for the main event.
That's a great way to think about it. And there's another type of dependent clause that's very common: relative clauses.
Relative clauses. Remind me about those.
Relative clauses use words like who, which, or that to introduce information about a noun in the main clause. For example, you could say, the book that I read last night was very interesting.
So, that I read last night is giving us more information about the book. It's specifying which book we're talking about.
Exactly. And relative clauses can add a lot of detail and specificity to your sentences.
They're like little magnifying glasses zooming in on a particular noun and giving us more information.
I love that image. It perfectly captures the role of relative clauses. And remember, with both types of dependent clauses, you can often switch the order of the clauses without changing the meaning.
So instead of because it was raining, I stayed inside, you could say I stayed inside because it was raining.
Precisely. And sometimes changing the order can make the sentence sound more natural or emphasize a particular part of the sentence.
It's like rearranging furniture in a room to find the best layout.
I love your analogies. They really help to make these grammatical concepts come to life.
Wow, I'm glad they're helpful. This has been a fascinating exploration of sentence structure so far. We've covered so much ground.
We have. From single-word imperatives to complex sentences with multiple clauses, we've seen how to build sentences that are both grammatically sound and expressive.
And we've learned that even seemingly small elements, like adjectives and adverbs, can have a big impact on the clarity and richness of our sentences.
It's all about using the right tools for the job.
Yep.
And like any skill, mastering sentence construction takes practice.
Exactly. The more we practice, the more confident and fluent we'll become in expressing ourselves. But we're just about out of time for this part of our exploration of sentence structure. Don't worry, though, we'll be back with more in part 2.
We'll be delving deeper into different types of sentences and exploring even more nuanced ways to craft engaging and effective communication. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Learn and Talk English podcast. We're picking up right where we left off, continuing our journey into the fascinating world of sentence structure.
Yeah, it's amazing how much we've already covered. But I feel like we're just getting started. There's always more to learn about the art of crafting sentences.
Absolutely, and that's what makes it so exciting. Language is a living, breathing thing, and there's always something new to discover.
I couldn't agree more. So in this part, we're going to explore some more specialized sentence structures that can add even more variety and impact to your communication.
Yeah. These structures might sound a little intimidating at first, but trust me, they're not as complicated as they seem. Once you understand the basic principles, you'll be able to use them with ease and confidence.
Well, I'm definitely feeling confident after our discussion in part 1. So let's dive into these specialized structures. What do you have in store for us? Let's start by talking about a type of sentence that's often used for emphasis or to create a dramatic effect. The exclamatory sentence.
Exclamatory sentences. Those are the ones that end with an exclamation mark.
That's right. They express strong emotions like surprise, excitement, or anger.
So they're like the verbal equivalent of shouting or whispering.
Exactly. They allow you to convey the intensity of your feelings through your writing or speech.
Can you give us some examples of exclamatory sentences?
Sure. Think of sentences like, what a beautiful day, or I can't believe it, or that's amazing.
Ah, I see. They really pack a punch, don't they? And they're pretty straightforward to construct, it seems.
They are. You simply take a declarative sentence, which is a regular statement, and add an exclamation mark at the end.
So the weather is nice becomes, what a beautiful day.
Precisely. And you can see how the exclamation mark changes the tone and intensity of the sentence.
It's like turning up the volume on your voice when you're excited about something.
Exactly. And exclamatory sentences can be really effective when you want to convey strong emotions or create a sense of urgency.
They're like the linguistic equivalent of fireworks.
I love that analogy. Now, let's move on to another interesting sentence structure: The interrogative sentence.
Interrogative sentences. Those are questions, right?
Yes, and they're essential for engaging in conversations, seeking information, and expressing curiosity.
We use them all the time without even thinking about it.
We do. And just like with other sentence types, there are different ways to construct interrogative sentences.
So what are some of the common ways to form questions in English?
One common way is to use an auxiliary verb like do, be, or have, and invert the subject and the verb.
Okay, so instead of saying he is going to the store,
Yeah.
we would ask, is he going to the store?
Exactly. And you'll notice that the word order changes when we form the question.
The auxiliary verb moves to the beginning of the sentence, creating that questioning tone.
Precisely. And another way to form questions is to use question words like who, what, when, where, why, or how.
So we could ask, what is he buying at the store? Or why is he going to the store?
Exactly. These question words help us to target specific information that we want to know.
They're like little detectives helping us uncover the details we're looking for.
I love that image. And interrogative sentences are all about seeking information and exploring different perspectives.
They're essential tools for learning and understanding the world around us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, let's move on to a sentence structure that's a bit more complex but also incredibly useful, the compound complex sentence.
Compound complex sentences. Those sound intense.
They can be, but they're not as intimidating as they sound. A compound complex sentence is simply a combination of a compound sentence and a complex sentence.
Okay. Remind me what those are again.
Right. A compound sentence has two or more independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction. A complex sentence, on the other hand, has at least one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses.
So a compound complex sentence has at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause.
You got it. It's like a super sentence, packing a lot of information into one grammatical unit.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. How about this? Although I was tired, I finished my work, and then I went for a walk.
Let's break that down.
Mm.
Although I was tired is a dependent clause. I finished my work is an independent clause. And then I went for a walk is another independent clause, all connected together with conjunctions.
Exactly. And you can see how this compound complex structure allows you to express a series of events or ideas in a clear and concise way.
It's like creating a roadmap for your reader, guiding them through the different parts of your thought process.
That's a great way to think about it. And complex sentences can be incredibly powerful when used effectively.
They allow you to express complex ideas and relationships in a way that's both grammatically sound and engaging for your audience.
Precisely. And with practice, you'll be able to wield these complex sentences like a true wordsmith.
It's amazing how much depth and nuance we can create with language just by understanding these different sentence structures.
It really is. And the more we explore these structures, the more we realize the incredible power and flexibility of the English language.
I'm feeling inspired to go out and write some epic complex sentences now.
That's the spirit. And remember, the key to mastering any skill is practice.
Practice, practice, practice. But for now, we're going to take a short break. Be sure to join us for part 3 of our exploration of sentence structure, where we'll be exploring even more fascinating aspects of English grammar.
We'll be looking at different sentence patterns, common grammatical errors to avoid, and tips for writing with clarity and style. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Learn and Talk English podcast. We've journeyed through the mountains and valleys of sentence structure, and now we're standing at the summit, ready to enjoy that panoramic view of English grammar.
Yeah, it's been quite a climb, but the view from here is definitely worth it. We can see how all the different elements of a sentence work together to create a cohesive and meaningful whole.
And from this vantage point, we can also spot some potential pitfalls that trip up even experienced writers.
Exactly. So in this final part, we're going to explore some common sentence patterns, identify some grammatical errors to avoid, and share some tips for writing with clarity and style.
Sounds like a great plan. Let's start with those sentence patterns. What are some common patterns that we should be aware of?
Well, one very common pattern is the subject-verb-object pattern, often abbreviated as SVO. This pattern is the backbone of many English sentences.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Think of the sentence. The chef cooked the meal. The chef is the subject, cooked is the verb, and the meal is the object. This pattern is simple and direct, conveying a clear action performed by the subject on the object.
It's a classic storytelling structure. Someone does something to something else.
Precisely. And another common pattern is the subject-verb complement pattern, or SVC. This pattern is often used to describe or define the subject.
Okay, so instead of an action verb, we have a linking verb like is or seems, right?
You got it. For example, you could say, the soup is delicious. The soup is the subject, is the linking verb, and delicious is the complement, which describes the subject.
It's like a little equation. Subject equals complement.
That's a great way to think about it. And these are just two examples of many sentence patterns that you'll come across in English.
It's amazing how these patterns provide a framework for constructing sentences that are both grammatically correct and easy to understand.
It's like having a set of blueprints for building different types of linguistic structures.
Speaking of building structures, are there any common grammatical errors that we should watch out for?
Absolutely. One very common error is the dreaded sentence fragment.
Sentence fragments, those are incomplete sentences. All right.
Exactly. They're pieces of sentences that are missing a subject, a verb, or both. They might sound like sentences, but they don't express a complete thought.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Consider this. Walking down the street, it has a verb and an object, but it's missing a subject. To make it a complete sentence, you would need to add a subject, like, she was walking down the street.
That makes sense. So we need to be careful not to leave out any essential elements when constructing our sentences.
Exactly. And another common error is the run-on sentence.
Run-on sentences, those are the ones that just keep going and going, right?
That's one way to describe them. They're essentially two or more independent clauses that are improperly joined together.
So they're like sentences that have gotten out of control.
That's a fun way to think about it. And they can be quite confusing for the reader. For example, you might have something like this. I went to the library, I checked out a book, I came home. It's all crammed together without proper punctuation or conjunctions.
It's like a linguistic traffic jam.
I love that analogy. To fix a run-on sentence, you need to either separate the clauses into individual sentences or connect them properly, using conjunctions or semicolons.
So it's all about creating clear boundaries between ideas and ensuring that each sentence expresses a complete thought.
Precisely. And these are just two examples of common grammatical errors that can affect sentence structure. There are many others, but being aware of these common pitfalls can help you avoid them in your own writing and speaking.
It's like having a mental checklist to ensure that our sentences are well constructed and easy to follow.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about some tips for writing with clarity and style. After all, understanding sentence structure is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to effective communication.
Okay, I'm ready for some writing wisdom. What are your top tips?
Well, one of the most important tips is to keep your sentences concise and to the point. Avoid unnecessary words or phrases that clutter up your writing.
So less is more when it comes to sentence length.
Often, yes. Short, punky sentences can be very effective, especially when you want to emphasize a point or create a sense of urgency.
They're like little jabs of meaning.
Exactly. But of course, you don't want all of your sentences to be short. Varying your sentence length can create rhythm and intria in your writing.
It's like composing a piece of music. You need a mix of long and short notes to create a pleasing melody.
I love that analogy. Another important tip is to use active voice whenever possible. Active voice makes your writing more direct and engaging.
Remind me about the difference between active and passive voice.
In active voice, the subject performs the action. For example, the cat chased the mouse. In passive voice, the subject receives the action. For example, the mouse was chased by the cat.
Ah, I see. Active voice puts the emphasis on the doer of the action, while passive voice shifts the focus to the receiver.
Precisely. And in most cases, active voice is clearer and more concise.
It's like the difference between saying, I baked a cake, and the cake was baked by me. The first sentence is much more direct and impactful.
Exactly. And here's another tip. Don't be afraid to use transitions to connect your ideas smoothly. Words and phrases like however, therefore, in addition, and on the other hand, can help your reader follow your train of thought.
It's like building bridges between your sentences so your reader can cross them easily.
That's a great way to think about it. And finally, remember that writing is a process. Don't expect to produce a perfect first draft. Give yourself time to revise and edit your work.
It's like polishing a gem. It takes time and effort to bring out its full brilliance.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the better you'll become at crafting sentences that sparkle with clarity and style.
This has been an incredible journey through the world of sentence structure. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. It's been a pleasure sharing our passion for language with you.
And we hope you've enjoyed it too. Remember, language is a powerful tool. Use it wisely and creatively to communicate your thoughts and ideas with the world.
And never stop learning. There's always something new to discover about the beauty and complexity of the English language.
Thanks for joining us on the Learn and Talk English podcast. We'll see you next time.